And with the film submission, I try to move from submission to dialogue with God. So essentially it's about women on a prayer mat, like Muslims are required to pray 5 times a day. And on the prayer mat, the women are saying, I submit my will to you. This is what you say about me in your own words, because the Quran is considered to be the word of God. And that's written on the body of the woman. For instance, the woman that reads in the Quran, if she's disobedient to her husband, he has the right to beat her. And she explains how the husband uses and abuses this right. And it ends with her saying, I don't know if I will submit any longer. Now, with the film submission, I intended to have a debate on that concept of God. Is it good to submit? Also, people were outraged. Muslims were outraged. They thought it was blasphemy. Theo van Gogh was killed for it. But the debate is really, what offends you more? Is it the holy text written on the body, on the surface of a woman? Is that what offends you more than the content, which says, beat a disobedient wife, or a wife is as an akka to you. You can come unto your tilth as you please, which is really justifying marital rape. Lower your gaze and cover yourself. Is that, what do you find more offensive? And Muslims who have been angry and who have said that they've been offended and who thought that the murder of Theo van Gogh is justified have not answered that question.
Did you have any imagination at that time that it would have this impact on people?
Provoke to discussion, yes, but not provoke to murder. We did not know exactly that Theo van Gogh was going to be murdered. Theo and I thought at the time of some kind of violence, but it was abstract. We were talking about a film and I was saying, Theo, please, it could be dangerous, don't put your name on the title role.
And what did he say then?
He thought I was ridiculous and he said, you're asking me to make a film, my film, and not put my name on it. We live in Holland. He said, we don't live in some barbaric country. So I think he was being very much himself. He was being very, very Dutch. He was just being, there's freedom of expression and I'm not going to negotiate about it. I'm going to put my name, whatever happens.
How was your relationship to him?
I didn't know Theo van Gogh. I think when I'm making the film, maybe I had met him 3 or 4 times at most. But I, of course, knew of him in that he had a column. And strange enough, for someone like him, a part of the left-wing establishment, he had very astute and very accurate thoughts on Islam. And so that's why, to me, he was a very interesting figure.
And on his chest when he was murdered, there was a letter that told that you were going to be the next. How did you react on that?
Well, it was very clear. He was killed because he had no protection. If he had had protection, he would not have been killed. If I had had no protection, there would be no letter. It was me they wanted. So I reacted to the letter in the way it was presented. It wasn't a myth. I was under protection for 2 years at the time.
But after that, you have continued your criticism. Why didn't you stop after that?
Because it's very, very important not to appease terror. I had the choice immediately on the Tuesday that Theo was killed to say, okay, this is enough. I'm not going to do anything anymore. But I also understood the logic of terror and the logic of the murder. That's precisely what they wanted. They want us all to stop. They want us all to stop criticizing. And if you understand that logic, then you don't stop, especially not at that moment, because it's a moment they choose for you. Then I would be frightened into keeping quiet. And I think that would have been a much greater betrayal to Theo and to the principle of freedom of expression than if I had not started at all.
Had you imagined that this could happen in Holland?
No. And many people did not imagine it could happen in Holland. Just as many people in the United States did not imagine that it was possible for the Twin Towers to fall, because really men with their minds about them would go and fly airplanes into them. none of us knew, none of us know what is coming. But after many such events now, in the name of Islam, we know that it's possible.
What does that tell you?
It tells us don't wait until they are strong enough, until everybody has been frightened into keeping quiet. It says we should speak out. It says we should compete for the hearts and minds of our own citizens, even if they're born into Islam. And it says, to me, especially if we want to win this conflict between Western principles or Western liberal democratic principles and Islamic principles, that we have to invest a great deal in women.
You grew up in Somalia. What was it like?
I grew up in Somalia until I was 8 years old. And in those 8 years old, I remember my father being in jail. My father belonged to the establishment that was left by the Italians and the British. Somalia was a nomadic nation. There was nothing called Somalia. But in 1960, a bunch of people living in that area were brought together and lines were drawn. That was labeled Somalia. It was given a flag, an army, a parliament, and now they had to rule themselves, self-rule. And my father was a part of that process. He was one of the people who was educated, who was engaged in establishing a government. But then, of course, like in many other African countries, that process did not run its course. A member of the army took power by force. His name is Mohammed Siad Barre, and he killed many of his opponents. And my father belonged to the group that were put in jail. So when I was born to this chaos, to a transition from an attempted democracy, which hadn't really taken root in Somalia, to a dictatorship established by a member of the army. So you can imagine politically how that, where I'm born into.
And how did that influence on you when you were a small child? Can you tell us about that?
Well, it influenced me in that I didn't meet my father until I was 8 years old in Saudi Arabia. That my father was some kind of godly image, because we prayed for him. We had a house, and in front of our house there was a tree, and we used to sit under that tree and tell stories and cook and play under the tree. And my sister and my brother, my mother and grandmother, we would sit and we would pray for him to come out of jail. But I was praying at the time for a father I had not met.
And how was it when you met him then?
It was lovely. It was one of the exciting moments of my life and my brother and my sister's life. That was in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia. It was after he had escaped from jail and after my mother had been inventive enough, creative enough to sneak us out of the country.
Was he like this God that you have imagined?
I put more of the image I had of him as a freedom fighter, as an exciting man, more of that into him than into my expectations of a father, because I always excused the fact that he wasn't there, that he always left us behind, that he found his politics and his work much more important than us as his family. But I remember also the good things he did. I remember him arguing with my mother, insisting that my sister and I go to school and that she had no right to remove us from school, and that if she did that, he would curse her. That kind of thing. So he's a very complex man.
In one way, he was very progressive, and in another way, he was trying also to keep the cultural system.
Yes.
So didn't that confuse you?
At the time, I didn't know about another world and another culture, but now, as an adult woman, as a mature woman who has also been in the West, I see that he was trying to reconcile two things that later became impossible to reconcile, and that he was not the only one, and that all of us, all the Somalis, were in some kind of transition. And after coming to Holland, I discovered, it's not only the Somalis, it's also the Iraqis, the Iranians, the Afghanis, the other Muslims. We are all trying to cling onto something, our past, which is tribal, which is collective, which was small and predictable, into the modern world, or what you describe now as